Hello, everyone. My name's Peta MacGillivray. I'm a Kalkutungu and South Sea Islander lawyer, formerly, and now senior researcher in the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership. And I'm here today with my colleague, Reeve. First of all, just like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Sydney's inner west on Gadigal country and pay my respects to Gadigal elders past and present. And I would like to acknowledge the Gamilaraay country and the Dharriwaa Elders Group in Walgett and elders in Walgett who we do this work with. And with their leadership and vision, we have the privilege of contributing some of this work. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the partnership, but not too much. I'll get you to go to the next slide. Thanks, Beck. The partnership we have published quite a bit on, including lots of community-facing scholarship and documentation that we produce together with our community partner, the Dharriwaa Elders Group, and that's on our website, and we have a link to that at the end of the presentation that we can direct you to. The partnership is a long-term partnership. So between UNSW, our research team, and the Dharriwaa Elders Group, we've been collaborating since 2018 formally. And before that, we actually worked with the Dharriwaa Elders Group and Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service, two long-standing community-controlled organisations in Walgett, on research which investigated the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with cognitive impairment and intellectual disability in the criminal justice system. And that's what we first began collaborating with the Elders Group. And that's led to this quite significant long-term collaboration. And you can see more of that on the website. But at the heart of the partnership is a model of a university and Aboriginal community-controlled organisation working together, where the governance of the ACO, being the Dharriwaa Elders Group Elders Council, is setting the vision, and they're identifying the community needs and priorities based in their service provision, but also the Aboriginal community staff that work in their organisation and the collaboration that they're doing across the community with other ACOs. So they have those deep links and accountabilities that they bring to the work. And then on the UNSW side of the partnership, we're doing the work on our side to find the right people to bring in and to see if they have something that's useful to address what the DEG is saying they need assistance with. So this is across the university, pan-university approach, engineers, public health, criminology, arts and design, so architects. We've got an architect who works in our team. Lots of collaborators working together. So the long-term goals of the partnership stem from the Dharriwaa Elders Group, many decades of setting their community development priorities in their community. And in particular, the two longest standing ACOs that I mentioned, Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service and the DEG, have been doing this work identifying what the needs are. And lots of communities and Aboriginal community controlled organisations are doing this, and then looking for collaborators who can align with those priorities. And so these are the very specific long-term goals that the Elders Group and the UNSW team have been collaborating on. The diagram on the left that you can see is the what look like orange wedges. They're the priority areas of the partnership. They are pretty consistent over the life of the partnership so far, but there have been some shifts. For example, housing has become an emerging priority, and dealing with fines has been an emerging priority, particularly in our jurisdiction, New South Wales, which has relied heavily on the use of police to enforce public health orders. That was a trend that we saw nationally, but with a great deal of punitiveness did we see it in New South Wales. Because Walgett is such an extremely over-policed community with 40 full-time police in the community for a population of less than 2,500, the police presence is extreme. So the holistic approach of the partnership means that we're considering those criminal justice factors all of the time, and the community wanting to address those harms and prevent those harms from that contact, but also the police presence. So one of the key areas of priority is youth justice and wellbeing, in particular, reducing contact with the criminal justice system. but taking a holistic approach, which doesn't make the criminal justice contact the whole purpose of the effort. It's actually about taking a holistic social emotional wellbeing approach, which is based in Aboriginal health practice, in preventing harms and providing for children and young people to thrive. And you can see the vision of the Elders Group on this slide, which is very much about young people thriving in the community. And it makes such a difference to be led as a team of researchers by that vision, instead of the common experience of, constantly re-articulating the problem, finding new ways and eloquent ways to do that, instead of actually contributing to something which can make a real difference as determined by the community that we're working with. So this is just a little summary of the work that we've done since 2018. And again, the diagram here, which we love to use a visual aid to communicate some of the ideas, is the key principles and the ways of working in the youth justice and wellbeing work. And we've got some publications and links at the end to direct you to see more of that information. And Beck, I'll pass on to you.
Thanks, Peter. So my name's Beck. I'm an econometrician working at the UNSW side of the partnership, although I'm based in Naarm. So I'll pay my respects to the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people who are the custodians of the land on which I live and work. I work very collaboratively online and in person, though, with the team at UNSW and in Walgett. So I'm going to talk just very quickly broadly about the role of data in our work, but then hone in on how that relates to the youth wellbeing work, and specifically the data linkage study that we're developing at the moment. So another diagram for you. So this wheel here shows the way that we work with different kinds of data. So our work is elder-led and mixed methods and has a variety of purposes. So as with all of the work of Yuwaya Ngarra-li, the Elders Council set the agenda, and then the UNSW team and the Dharriwaa Elders Group team work collaboratively together. And we use data from a variety of sources for a variety of purposes. So research, evaluation, looking at systemic failures and what works to help Aboriginal people and Aboriginal young people in the context of the youth wellbeing work to thrive. So in the wedges here, you can see some of the different types of data that we use in this work. It's built up progressively over time. So that's to ensure that everybody's on the same page in terms of their capacity to understand, interpret and use data that's relevant to the community and the particular issue that's being evaluated or investigated. And that capability or capacity building happens at both ends, because as the team at UNSW, we're learning from the community to make sure that the work that we're doing is relevant and driven by the community and the needs set by the Elders Council. At the same time, the Dharriwaa Elders Group are building their data literacy, and we work together in a very iterative fashion of back and forth to understand what data are going to be useful, to analyse and interpret that data, refine the analyses and produce publications and share the results. So the data that we use has a variety of uses. It can be to inform the work of Yuwaya Ngarra-li and the Dharriwaa elders on the ground, to evaluate the work of the partnership, and also for building evidence for systemic change as well, to hold government agencies to account for their responsibilities. And at all stages of all of this work, the 5 core principles of being community-led, culturally connected, holistic, strengths-focused and rights-based are embedded at every stage of the work that we do. So I'm going to sort of introduce now why we started, or how we came to the point of deciding to undertake a data linkage study. So early on, I joined the team in 2020, and from a quantitative data perspective, we started using publicly available administrative data to see what insights and use we could get from those data to understand what was happening in the community from a systems perspective. And so for those analyses, we drew on police data, census data, fines data that Revenue publish on dashboards, which are very useful for our dealing with fines team, and publicly available education data through, for example, the ACARA My Schools website. However, it became, whilst those data have a degree of usefulness, it became quite evident that to get into more detailed understanding of what was happening, we really need to look at unit record data, because publicly available data don't necessarily speak to the specific questions that we are trying to answer, or aren't disaggregatable enough to look at different trends that are going on in different parts of the data. So in 2022, we analysed data that the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research in New South Wales provided to us, BOCSAR for short, and we used those data to look at whether, since the focused youth work had started with Yuwaya Ngarra-li, whether we were seeing the changes in police diversion, so greater use of diversions by the police that we were hoping for, and a reduction in court appearances by young people, and a reduction in youth detention. And there's a research report on our website that you're welcome to have a look at if you're interested in that work. We did find that overall, not necessarily for every subgroup, but overall diversions had improved and court appearances had reduced. And we had met one of the goals of the Elders Council, which was that less than 10% of Aboriginal young people from Walgett should be appearing in court. So that was really useful data. However, in our analysis of that with the DEG, it became really obvious that the understanding both the causes and the outcomes associated with justice system interactions for young people did not lie solely within the justice system. There are, for example, unmet health and education and housing needs, and all of these things are interrelated. So we can't sufficiently understand what's going on and provide appropriate solutions without looking at everything holistically. And it's also insufficient to look at the different data sets individually, because everything's related. So to do a really robust analysis of these data, we decided with the Dharriwaa Elders Group that the next step in this research was to create a data linkage study so that we could look at everything more holistically. So this little wheel here summarises the data that we're applying to look at in this data linkage study. I'll talk about the approval process in a minute. We haven't got everything that we hope for, but we're almost there. So we health, housing, education, child protection, all of that context is relevant to what's happening in the justice system, and of course justice data itself, including fines, because whilst we found that diversions had improved and that court appearances are going down, fines are a huge burden for the community, including young people who, for example, are repeatedly fined for not displaying P plates. And that's one of the parts of work that the Dealing with Fines team are addressing, because seeing that evidence in data has enabled the Dealing with Fines team to talk to young people about the need to display P plates on their cars, and they're actually handing out those plates, and that's been very popular. So that's just a little example of how the work that we're doing with data actually informs the work on the ground of the DEG. So using all of these data, we'll be getting a better understanding of how and in what circumstances young people are interacting with different services, including the justice system. And that will help with planning and advocacy to make sure that young people are getting access to the services and supports that they need. And it will also help us to look at how changes are impacting. So, for example, that increased use of diversions by the police, has that been sustained? And how is that manifesting in other spheres as well? Does that have a knock-on effect, for example, to health and education outcomes? So I thought for these next few slides, it would be helpful to anybody else who's thinking of undertaking a similar data journey to explain to you the different phases of work that have been involved in this, because it's an arduous process. And it's something that we've learned is very difficult for communities to undertake without support of, in our case, the university, because of the relationships that we have with data custodians and so on. But the first and foremost, at the very beginning of this, the first phase of work was internal between the Dharriwaa Elders Group and the Elders Council and the staff at UNSW. We then had some initial external negotiations to see what was the most feasible way of undertaking this linkage, and I'll talk to these in a bit more detail in a moment. The longest phase of work was phase 3, which was negotiating with all of the different agencies that host multiple data sets that we're linking together for this piece of work. And then phase 4, which is where we're at now, which is the final application stage to enable the Centre for Health Record Linkage to link the data for us. So the first phase of internal work, the very, very first step was that we worked with a member of the Dharriwaa Elders Council to create protocols for this work to ensure that it links to those core principles and that those principles are embedded in every single stage of the work, right from dissemination, designing the research questions, identifying the appropriate data, how we're going to analyse that data, its interpretation, and how the results are disseminated. And we have a document about that that's also available on our website, the Data Linkage Protocol, which you're welcome to have a look at. So following that, we refined research questions with the Dharriwaa Elders Group, and that process really goes back as well as from the point of having decided to go ahead with the data linkage study, because all of these issues have been building in our data analysis and consultation with the Elders Group over a number of years. But the questions that we came to and refined for the purpose of this data linkage study were 3 overarching questions, and there will be numerous smaller questions underlying each of those. But firstly, in terms of the youth diversion work, what changes are we seeing in Aboriginal young people's court and custody outcomes since that focused work on youth diversion began in 2018? And then leading on from that, are those changes associated with other things like differences or changes in other areas, be that health, education, the context of family circumstances, like a young person growing up in out-of-home care, for example. And then more broadly, what can we learn overall from the different interactions that young people have with different parts of the system, and how can that inform our work and advocacy? Following on from identifying the research questions, we then worked together to identify relevant data sources that would help us to answer those questions, with the key outcome areas being in the justice, health and education sectors, but also a lot of other underlying factors at the individual, family, community and systems level. And some of those, but not all, will be evident in data, like what's going on in the housing system and in the child protection system, for example. And others come very much from community knowledge and our interaction with the Dharriwaa Elders Group in understanding the context of what we're seeing in data. The second stage, when we started to work externally, was to think about how are we going to do this? What is the most feasible approach to either accessing or linking data ourselves to enable this work? And so we spoke with 2 key agencies. Firstly, Family and Community Services Insights Analysis and Research team, who are within DCJ, and they host the Human Services Linked Dataset, which is a linked government administrative data set that contains most of the data that we were interested in and more in New South Wales. And we also spoke to the Centre for Health Record Linkage. They're embedded within New South Wales Health, and they undertake bespoke data linkage services using administrative data, sometimes linked to other data as well, like survey data. Through those consultations, it became apparent that we were unlikely to get approval to access the Human Services linked dataset because the Walgett community is quite small, and those data are provided at a level no smaller than statistical area level 2, which means it extends more broadly than the Walgett community. And importantly, so that location extends out as far as Lightning Ridge, which is a large community which is not representative of the community in Walgett. So we felt that that would not be useful for this work because it would not be relevant, because it's not representative. So we decided to go down the pathway of using the Centre for Health Record Linkage to help create a bespoke data set for this work, but very much supported by FACSIA, who hosts the Human Services dataset, in terms of them supporting this work and helping us to get access to the datasets that they manage, which is public housing, homelessness services, out-of-home care, and child protection data. And so we will be using the Centre for Health Record Linkage to link those data with various other administrative datasets. After that, we consulted with WAMS, the Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service, because as Pete said, they're an important ACHO in Walgett and someone with whom the Dharriwaa Elders Group and Yuwaya Ngarra-li more broadly work very closely with. And following that, we submitted our application to the Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council, which was approved just over 2 years ago. However, phase 3, which was the detailed consultation with all the different actors, was a very arduous and time-consuming process that's taken us about 2 years. Unfortunately, and I'm assuming this is the case throughout Australia, not just within New South Wales, but every government agency have their own governance structures, their own application processes that all need to be adhered to, and it takes a very long time to negotiate all of the documentation and the requirements to access data. Also, not every agency is used to sharing their data, so there are different levels of capability within the government departments and different levels of transparency about their data holdings. So with some agencies, New South Wales Health in particular, it's very clear they have data dictionaries and variables lists published online on the Cheryl website. With other agencies, there's varying levels of information available about their data holdings. However, having navigated that process, we've applied for data from Family and Community Services, so that's the housing, homelessness and child protection and out-of-home care data, the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research for court, custody and police data, the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, who manage NAPLAN, so education outcomes data, and the Revenue New South Wales, with whom we're working very closely to access fines data for the community. So for those agencies, we now have in principle support for the project from all of the different data custodians that sit within those agencies and manage the data sets that we're applying for. New South Wales Ministry of Health, because the Centre for Health Record Linkage sits within that agency, then that's the last hurdle, is getting approval from those data custodians, and the application is with them now. We've also been speaking to the Department of Education for more detailed data about attendance and suspensions and so on. We're still progressing that conversation. So at the moment, that's been put to one side, but we understand that that is progressing their end, and if and when that's approved, it will go into our project as a modification. But we didn't want to take any more time than the 2 years we'd already taken to get to this point. So we are now in the final phase of the process. The Centre for Health Record Linkage have received all of the documentation and determined the project technically feasible. And it's now sitting with New South Wales Health data custodians for approval for the data sets that they're the custodians of. We've received one approval from them so far, and hopefully more will be coming in the next few weeks. Once that has taken place and we receive an independent peer review, all the documentation will then go to the Population Health Services Research Ethics Committee for approval for the Centre for Health Record Linkage to link the data, subject to a couple of separate legal agreements that are happening with a couple of the agencies who are involved. but those are almost finalised as well. So ultimately, we will the data for young people from different agencies will go to the Centre for Health Record Linkage to be linked and de-identified, so nobody's identifiable in the data. And then it will come to us, Yuwaya Ngarra-li, where it will sit on something called the Erica, which is a highly secure system. The data will be fully encrypted and only unencryptable by me, but I will work closely with the rest of the team in analysing and interpreting the data. Oops. So sorry for that very nerdy talk and detail about data, but that's my bag. I'll hand back to Pete to wrap up and then we can talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Beck. I think we all love the nerdy detail, so thank you for your time to share all of that with everyone in the webinar. I'm just going to finish up with a couple of points about Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance and the increasing interest in these ideas, particularly around data, because of the Priority Reform 4 under the Closing the Gap National Agreement. In the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership, we're in the position where a lot of the ideas and concepts and principles in Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance have been practiced for a long time by the DEG, and which our research team have embedded and been informed by in our research. So the original project with WAMS and the Dharriwaa Elders Group really focused on self-determination and Indigenous methodologies, which ensured that community priorities were at the core of the work. And so in this data linkage, it was in phase 1 that Beck mentioned that we really started to think about Indigenous data governance in particular, and being more explicit about how we're operationalizing that in the practice of setting up this research and what the DEG needed to move along the continuum into building and being able to claim Indigenous data sovereignty in particular. So that's an ongoing piece of work which is led by a lot of conceptual thinking and abstraction by Indigenous scholars, but also practitioners around Indigenous data governance. But our work is really uniquely placed, given our model of a university and a community partner, to think about how we're pairing the practice that underpins Indigenous data governance by ACOs with research. So that's an interesting emergence. And I think for researchers in doing institutional research, it's harder to find models like that. So we're thinking of, but I'm of the personal belief that ACOs need to be talking about Indigenous data governance and Indigenous data sovereignty, not institutions. It kind of doesn't make sense. So in the partnership, it's about supporting the DEG to eventually, when they feel ready, to be able to talk more explicitly about what that is. And here's the link to our website if people wanted to go and have a look and click around, where we have all of our publications that we've mentioned today, in particular the linkage protocol, which Beck mentioned. We've also got a publication in Transform that was published last year, a journal which talks about how we practice in the UNSW side of the partnership, what that looks like in detail, in particular the research component. So just to, and it's nice and short.